In the bustling city of Lagos lived a brilliant girl named Julia. She was born with a silver spoon, and her life was one of comfort and ease because her parents were incredibly wealthy. They owned cars, houses, and a lot of property in their name. Julia's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Adams, showered her with love and everything money could buy. From a young age, Julia never had to lift a finger, and she never lacked anything. House helps catered to her every whim, handling the cleaning, cooking, and laundry. Unlike Julia, her mother, Mrs. Adams, was once a poor girl. She didn't grow up with the luxuries Julia enjoyed. Mrs. Adams never had house helps to do things for her and wasn't a fan of them either. She only allowed house helps because the house was huge. However, Mrs. Adams never let the house helps cook for her family. Mrs. Adams was hardworking at home, but Julia was the opposite. Julia couldn't cook or clean. She spent most of her time at home reading books and watching TV. "Julia, darling," her mother called out one sunny afternoon, "could you please set the table for dinner?" Julia peeked out from behind a mountain of textbooks. "But Mom, I have so much homework. Can Kofi do it?" Kofi was one of the house helps, a kind but overworked young man. Her mother, with a hint of sadness in her voice, said, "Honey, everyone needs to learn how to do basic things around the house. How will you take care of yourself when you grow up? You might not always have someone like Kofi to help." Julia scoffed, "Mom, please, I don't want to be someone who only does chores around the house all day. I'm going to be a doctor, a famous one. Imagine Dear Julia written on my white coat." Her mother sighed. Julia was a star student at school, her exceptional grades earning her the respect of teachers and classmates alike. Everyone believed she was destined to be the senior prefect, a prestigious student leader role. But behind the facade of academic excellence, Julia harbored a secret: she was incredibly lazy at home. Sweeping, cleaning, or even the most basic chores felt like menial tasks to her, and cooking held no interest for her whatsoever. Later that week, during a parent-teacher association (PTA) meeting, a gathering where parents and teachers discussed student progress, Julia's mom knew she needed to seize the opportunity to address her concerns about her daughter. When she saw the principal, Mr. Okoye, in the hall, she began with a voice filled with concern, "I'm worried about Julia. She's so focused on her studies that she doesn't know how to do anything for herself. How will she manage a home and a family someday?" Mr. Okoye, the stern-faced principal, raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Adams, I understand your concerns, however, the school's focus is on academics. Perhaps you could." But Mr. Okoye was interrupted by Julia's mother, her voice rising in frustration. "Isn't school supposed to prepare them for life? How can she be a leader if she can't even manage basic tasks?" News of this outburst traveled fast, reaching Julia's ears through her friends, Tara and Beezy. "Did your mom really say that in front of everyone?" Tara gasped, eyes wide. Julia rolled her eyes. "Oh please, she's exaggerating. We have house helps for a reason, right?" Little did Julia know, her behavior had caught Mr. Okoye's attention. One day, he called Julia to his office. "Julia," he began, his voice surprisingly gentle, "your mother expressed some concerns about let's just say your well-roundedness as a student." Julia shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Okoye, I can assure you, my grades are excellent." "Indeed they are," he agreed. "However, being a leader is about more than just book smarts. It's about responsibility, about being able to take care of yourself and those around you." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Becoming senior prefect requires a well-rounded skill set, Julia. Are you sure you're prepared?" The gravity of the situation finally hit Julia. She might lose the chance of being a future leader of the school, so she determined to prove herself. She blurted out, "I can cook. I'll make you a delicious stew all by myself, then you'll see." Mr. Okoye, intrigued by her sudden enthusiasm, agreed to the dinner invitation on one condition: the meal had to be cooked solely by Julia. Now faced with a real challenge, Julia knew she had to take action. Julia's arrival at home often meant a flurry of demands and a storm of bad moods. She peeked into the living room, spotting Kofi, sprawling on the plush couch, flipping through a fashion magazine. "Kofi," she called out, her voice dripping with impatience, "where have you been? My room is a mess. Clean it now, and don't forget to dust under the bed and make sure you polish my shoes, the ones with the gold buckles, not the silver ones." Kofi nodded silently, used to Julia's bossy orders. He shuffled towards her room, a large airy space with a walk-in closet overflowing with designer clothes. Mountains of dirty laundry lay piled on a chaise longue, and scattered makeup palettes adorned the vanity. He cleaned diligently, his heart heavy, wishing Julia understood the effort it took to maintain such a large house while she spent her days learning and socializing. He spent his scrubbing floors, wiping surfaces, and catering to her every wish. Later that evening, Mama Ngozi, Julia's mother, returned home from work. The aroma of Kofi's delicious stew filled the air, a stark contrast to the mess in Julia's room. "Julia, have you finished your homework?" Mama Ngozi asked, her voice laced with concern. Julia, sprawled on the couch again, a half-eaten bowl of chips resting on her lap, lazily pointed towards her desk with a manicured fingernail. "Yeah, it's all done." Mama Ngozi, noticing the untouched textbooks and scattered papers, knew better. But before she could say anything, Julia launched into a diatribe about the upcoming prefect elections at school. "I have to win, Mama," she declared. "I'm the smartest, most capable person in my class. It'll look so good on my college applications." Mama Ngozi listened patiently, then sat down next to Julia. "Julia, being a leader is about more than just being smart," she said gently. "It's about responsibility, respect, and setting a good example. Do you think your classmates would believe in a leader who bosses their house help around and leaves messes for others to clean?" Julia's face flushed red, she hadn't thought of it that way. Her leadership skills at school felt like a costume she put on, while at home she was a different person entirely. "I know I mess up, Mama," Julia mumbled, a flicker of shame in her eyes. Mama Ngozi placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "It's never too late to change, Julia. Maybe you can start by being a leader at home. Help Kofi clean your room, show him some appreciation for his hard work. True leaders earn respect, they don't demand it." Julia nodded slowly, the weight of her mother's words settling in. Maybe the most important election wasn't for school prefect but for a different kind of leadership, one built on responsibility, respect, and a willingness to learn from her mistakes. The midday sun beat down on the schoolyard as Julia flopped onto a rickety bench under the shade of a sprawling mango tree. Her two best friends, Tara and Beezy, flanked her, their faces etched with concern. "Julia, are you sure about this prefect thing?" Tara asked, flipping through her worn notebook. "You haven't exactly been campaigning the traditional way." Julia snorted, "Traditional, Tara. Being prefect is about popularity, not bake sales and pep rallies." She tossed her sleek phone onto the bench, the case adorned with a glittery monogram. "Besides," she added, a mischievous glint in her eyes, "I have other plans." Beezy, ever the cautious one, raised an eyebrow. "What kind of plans, Julia?" Julia leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a whisper, "Money. Lots of it." Tara and Beezy exchanged startled glances. Tara, the voice of reason, blurted out, "Bribery." "Julia, that's not okay. You can't just buy your way into being prefect." Julia rolled her eyes. "Relax, Tara. It's not like I'm handing out 100 Naira bills, but a little incentive never hurt anyone, right?" "Incentive like what?" Beezy pressed, her voice laced with apprehension. "Well," Julia began, a sly grin spreading across her face, "I can accidentally lose a few 20 naira notes here and there, or maybe forget my lunch money and need a kind classmate to share theirs. You know, the usual student struggle stories." Tara gasped. "Julia, that's taking advantage of people. And what about the other candidates? They're working hard to earn votes, not manipulate them with freebies." Julia scoffed. "Hard work? Please. David's just recycling his brother's old campaign promises, and Aisha's kindness act is about as genuine as plastic flowers. Besides, everyone loves a little extra cash, especially with jollof rice prices skyrocketing." Beezy, usually quiet, spoke up. "Julia, maybe you should reconsider your strategy. Being a leader isn't about who throws the most money around, it's about inspiring and representing your classmates, someone they can look up to." Julia's grin faltered for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing her eyes. Maybe her friends were right, maybe there was a better way to win, one that didn't involve manipulation. Just then, a small figure with a worn backpack approached their bench. It was Kemi, a shy girl from their class who often received hand-me-downs from Julia. "Julia," Kemi mumbled, clutching a crumpled note, "I found this in your bag after class yesterday. I thought it might be important." Julia unfolded the note, recognition dawning on her face. It was a neatly written campaign flyer for David, the other main candidate, complete with a slogan about promoting fairness and honesty. A wave of shame washed over her. She'd been so caught up in winning that she hadn't even noticed how her strategy could be seen by others. Here was someone she'd cast aside, someone who still valued honesty and kindness. Looking at her friends, their faces resolute and honest, Julia knew what she had to do. Taking a deep breath, she addressed Kemi. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Actually, this is exactly what I was looking for. Maybe we can all discuss campaign strategies together." A shy smile lit up Kemi's face. In that moment, Julia understood that true leadership wasn't about money or popularity, it was about earning respect, inspiring others, and leading by example. The path to becoming prefect might not be paved with easy bribes, but it could be built on a foundation of honesty and genuine connection with her peers. Julia woke up feeling like a giant and stretched. The old newspaper she used as a fan fluttered down, sunlight peeking through the window, showing dust floating in the air. Dirty dishes piled high in the sink proved she'd ignored chores yesterday. But today was special. Today, Julia was the winner. Everyone at school cheered her name. Julia, the laziest girl at home, somehow became the student body prefect. Principal Okoye's deep voice congratulated her, but then another voice reminded her of the promise she made earlier to cook a delicious stew for him to prove she wasn't as lazy as her mom had reported. Otherwise, she wouldn't be prefect, even if she won. Julia groaned. All that celebrating disappeared. Principal Okoye wasn't exactly her friend, he was more like a tricky fox who liked to bend the rules. According to him, the perks of being prefect included everything from getting his slippers to running errands, and now, cooking. Julia, who could barely boil water without burning it, had to make stew, a dish that, though simpler than some, still required a level of skill and attention she lacked. The day of the dinner arrived, and Julia felt a huge surge of confidence after watching lots of YouTube videos on cooking stew. As soon as she heard her principal, Mr. Okoye, had arrived, she started cooking. She chopped vegetables, stirred the pot, and followed the instructions meticulously. However, something wasn't right. As she tasted the stew, it lacked the flavor she expected. In a moment of panic, she grabbed a bottle of FANTA, her favorite fruit drink, and poured it into the boiling pot of stew, hoping it would add a burst of sweetness and richness to the dish. Julia never bothered to taste the concoction she called stew before serving it to anyone. She thought being smart in school meant being smart in everything. She quickly prepared some rice, dished the stew into a beautiful bowl, and went to serve Mr. Okoye, her principal, who was hungrily waiting for her at the dining table. When Mr. Okoye looked at the stew, he thought it was some fancy creation from a rich family. But when he tasted it, his face contorted in disgust. The sweet, syrupy Fanta clashed horribly with the savory stew, creating an unimaginable flavor in his mouth. He kindly called out, "Julia, please come. What kind of stew is this?" Julia confidently replied, "Stew, sir." He now asked again, "But why does the stew have an orange taste?" Julia chirped, "Oh, sir, I added Fanta to give it that awesome color and sweetness." This caused a burst of laughter in the room where Julia's mom and the house helps were. Disappointed and frankly a little insulted, Mr. Okoye left without finishing the stew. The stew was horrible, and he was angry that Julia had added Fanta to it. He left without finishing his meal, leaving Julia's mother ashamed and disappointed. She scolded Julia for her lack of common sense. Julia was humiliated, realizing her mistake. She made a genuine promise to herself to be more obedient at home and to always follow her mother to the kitchen. The following week when she returned to school, everyone laughed at her, but Julia took it in stride. She had learned a valuable lesson and was determined to improve. And so, Julia's journey from being a lazy girl to a responsible young woman began. She learned that academic brilliance alone is not enough. One must also possess practical skills and common sense. This African moral tale serves as a reminder that true leadership is not just about academic excellence but also about responsibility, respect, and the willingness to learn from one's mistakes.